I'll do a full rundown of the Mets season on my computer, but in this video, I wanted to quickly look at the manager and the management grading. So we're going to be looking at both Mendoza and Stearns in this one of which I think a bit more highly of than the other, as you'll discuss. Because if I had to grade them, I'm going to give Carlos Mendoza an A-. Stearns, I'm probably going to lean towards a B+. And there's a few reasons why. First, we'll talk about Stearns, because giving Stearns a B+ sounds a little insane. Hear me out. I've always been one of Stearns' biggest critics. And the trade deadline certainly did not, make me think much more highly of him. Because I supported the deadline for not trying to go all in and, not making the same mistakes that Billy Epler did, where he went all in. His team got 101 wins just to collapse down the stretch and lose in a wild card round of the playoffs, only to then go on a 75-win season and have to sell off all their great pitching staff because you got a bunch of old arms. I like the idea of having a lot of young guys on the team. I like the fact that he was willing to give Mark Vientos so many chances, who might not have played well at first, but 2024 was a breakout season for him. I am pretty confident that he will be an All-Star in 2025, set the Mets RBI record in the playoffs, hit 27 home runs throughout the season, and he didn't even have full playing time. He only had 3/4 of a season to even, get to all of these numbers. And, Mark Vientos could very well be the future face of the franchise, the same way Lindor was in 2024 and Pete Alonso was from the 2019 to 2023 time period. He probably would have been Rookie of the Year if not for the fact that he was ineligible because he had a few too many at-bats across 2022 and 2023. So this wasn't his first time in the majors. However, he never had any sort of significant playing time in the majors until starting in May 2024. And a Jose Iglesias move, again, you have a batter who was in the majors for a while but has been sent down to minor league for declining performance. You send him over to the Mets. Stearns promotes him when the team is at their lowest, and even though he didn't perform well in the playoffs where his batting average dropped to the 220s, he was good at first, and in his regular season, despite only 4 homers, he had a .337 batting average and was great in situations where you needed a base hit in order to score runs. Usually, you can rely on Iglesias to deliver. Also, the Candelita song is pretty good. However, he did suffer a declining performance in the postseason. However, there were then, some of his more questionable moves. Like, for example, why did he keep giving DJ Stewart chances? Now, Tyler McGill, I like the fact that he sent him down when his ERA was over 5 and brought in Paul Blackburn. Turns out Paul Blackburn wasn't very good for the Mets and then proceeded to get injured. But that's not really on Stearns. He had a convincing 4-2 record on the Oakland Athletics, and he didn't perform well in the Mets and then got injured. But again, can't really blame Stearns for that. And when they brought McGill back up, he improved significantly. McGill improved significantly, and his final season ERA actually dropped to around 4, which is pretty impressive considering that he didn't even have that much time to pitch. But he actually pitched relatively well in this. As for the trade deadline, though, I was not fond of his approaches to what he actually did. Because the Mets bullpen somehow found a way to get worse after the trade deadline, even though Stearns tried to not do anything to destroy it. You look at his moves and who he got, and they just weren't a ton of trustworthy guys that he got. Obviously, it sucked that Nunez was out. Sean Reed-Foley was out, and they didn't really have a ton of options in their bullpen. I will give him credit for that much. There weren't a lot of options. That being said, Ryan Stanek struggled initially on the Mets, but he did eventually get his shit together. He earned the win in relief in the September 9th game against the Blue Jays. As an example, he earned a win on September 9th against the Blue Jays, and his pitching improved. He also was very good in the postseason, ERA around 2 in the postseason, and wound up, probably being one of the best relievers in the postseason, and he did earn the win a few times. He earned quite a few wins in the postseason. However, you have Huascar Brazoban, which I get that he's supposed to be a low-leverage reliever, but the Mets really don't need that, considering that all the relievers suck. A lot of relievers suck. And why would you just waste time getting a prospect like Huascar Brazoban? Doesn't really make sense. And Phil Maton, who has been questionable because there have been months where his ERA was like 2, and months where his ERA was like 8. Sort of like Diaz, but a lot more inconsistent and not a very trustworthy guy. Did well at first on the Mets, but collapsed down the stretch, similar to Buto, and just completely imploded in the playoffs. Game 2 against the Milwaukee Brewers, ultimately, the Brewers' 8th inning comeback will be forgotten about because of the Mets' 9th inning comeback in Game 3. But had the Game 3 comeback not happened, everyone would be remembering how the Mets were only 2 innings away from victory, had a 3-1 lead that was later cut to 3-2 until it became a 5-3 Brewers lead after Phil Maton gave up 2 home runs in relief. Like Phil Maton was not good. Not good. And you look at his other moves, like Paul Blackburn, which I was actually fine with, because we needed to do something about Tyler McGill, and Kodai Senga had just gotten another injury, and Jesse Winker, who took time to acclimate to the Mets, but I'm fine with him being on our team, even though I don't know what they're going to do, because they have to either remove him or JD Martinez most likely, and they'll both be free agents. That'll be fun. But he didn't exactly set up this team, to be a World Series contender, which I get at in March, if you want it to be a transition year, to not do that. But once you were at the trade deadline and you saw what this team could actually do, I mean, they were, I think within 7 of the Phillies and controlled their destiny for the NL East, and they were just in the top wildcard spot. They had fallen back down to the 3rd wildcard spot, but the top wildcard spot was within reach. You had to be thinking not only a playoff push, but you had to be thinking a World Series push, and maybe not go all in on starting pitching, but you needed to get bullpen help. Getting Phil Maton didn't do it. Ryan Stanek, again, I was fine with, and there was just some other questionable promotions and demotions that they made, like keeping Adam Ottavino around even though he stunk. Took him forever to get rid of Jake Diekman. And I mean forever to get rid of Jake Diekman. And, I mean, like, he just was slow to react in a lot of cases. Now Mendoza and his A-. I'm going to cut him a bit of slack with some of his bullpen choices because, again, I'm not impressed with the bullpen Stearns set up, but he has still made a bunch of questionable decisions at times. Some of which are defendable, some of which are indefensible. So we'll talk about the bad first, and then we'll talk about the good, since the good is what everyone is harping upon. So, I've defended him before on some of his losses. When they collapsed on September 14th, listen, I supported that they pulled Severino because he was starting to have meltdowns every time he faced Bryce Harper, and he couldn't go past 6. He really couldn't. And I also like the idea of Danny Young. As it turns out, Danny Young stunk in September, but his record in that month was 2-0, and he was 4-0 on the season. And his ERA at that point was around 3. Now, obviously, this looked terrible in hindsight given what happened. But, at first, using Danny Young, like, it seemed like the logical move. Jose Buto was no longer to be trusted, seeing as how his pitching ability has gotten a lot worse. You can't use Edwin Diaz in the 7th. You could use Reed Garrett, but he might have been used already. And also, Reed Garrett isn't exactly the most trustworthy pitcher either. He's been inconsistent, I'll say that much. So, I'm not usually going to fault Mendoza for using Garrett Reed just because he had an amazing start to the year and then imploded. Like, you start off 5-0 with a .72 ERA. His ERA finished around 4 with a ERA of with a win-loss record of 8-5. So obviously not doing that well down the stretch. But Reed Garrett was just so he walked a ton of batters and didn't and gave up a lot of hits too. But I also felt like he could sometimes strike batters out in ways that they couldn't adapt to. And he was at times a convincingly good pitcher, and at times he stunk. That's my thoughts on Reed Garrett. But going back to, the 14th, I didn't blame him on his loss, because there wasn't really anyone else to use. The 15th, however, that was inexcusable, because the game was tied 1-1 with a runner on second, and you had Edwin Diaz in the game. Real Muto went 5-for-13 against Edwin Diaz, and he wound up walking it off with a single. It was so obvious, though, that you'd have a much better chance of forcing extra innings if you intentionally walked him and brought the next batter up. Listen, there are some times where I'm going to say that intentionally walking a guy, even with first base open, is not the smartest idea. For example, if the Mets were, say, up 2-1 in the spot, I would disagree with intentionally walking Real Muto, because a single is going to tie up the game either way, but to outright win the game, you need to blast the home run, whereas in this case, a double is going to likely win the game for the Phillies. So if they were up 2-1, I would say don't intentionally walk him, because either he'll get out and you win the game, you'll tie up the game if he gets any sort of base hit, and if he hits a home run, it's over. But in the other scenario, if the other guy shoots a double, that's likely going to end the game in a Philadelphia Phillies victory and the New York Mets loss. But this was a tie game. You could not allow another guy to cross the plate, or else you'd lose. So, any kind of base hit is going to win the game for the Phillies. So it doesn't matter about the guy on first. The guy on first is irrelevant in this case. You need to not let the guy on second come back home. And the best way of doing that would be intentionally walking Real Muto. That was Edwin Diaz's, only disaster in September, because game one of the doubleheader, he at least redeemed himself by pitching a relatively clean bottom of the ninth. But you gotta recognize the situation at hand, and you have to recognize that with a runner on second and with Real Muto at bat, the chances that the game is over right then and there, 5 for 13, that's like 38% chance. And that was a horrible decision by Carlos Mendoza in that spot to use him. There were also some times where he just brought in a pitcher who he knew sucked when the game seemed over, just to convince the Stearns why that pitcher needed to go, which I thought was a questionable move, to say the least, because it put these games really far out of reach. Carlos Mendoza also, I feel like, was oftentimes, like too quiet, indecisive. He didn't stand up for his players a ton. And, he's just someone who I thought was a good manager but didn't always make the best decisions. Now, did he change the culture of the Mets? Yes, considering that they were 22-33, and he turned them into a team that made the NLCS. He turned them in. He turned the losers into like actual winners. But the Mets could have gotten a lot more than 89 wins, even starting from June when he became a lot better as a manager. Because assessing him for the stuff he did in May, probably not the most fair thing in the world. There were times where he put out punt lineups against certain teams, and I mean like actual punt lineups, like having DJ Stewart, Eddie Alvarez in there. I mean, no. Again, not all of this was on Mendoza, but better in-game management, and you're likely looking at a team with 92 wins that's in a better position, and maybe it doesn't have the most blown leads in the MLB. That's all I'll say.